Hello, welcome to Italics, the Italian-American magazine. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. Here at CUNY, May is the month for finishing our work and proceeding to commencement. There's a lot to show you this month, so let's get to work. First, we'll take you to the 3 F's in Italian cultures, critical approaches to food, fashion, and film, our annual international conference at the Calandra Institute. We'll show you some highlights of this event, including keynote speaker John Mariani, author of How Italian Food Conquered the World. Next, we'll take you to a panel discussion of the Artists of Iavanet, the Italian-American Visual Artists Network. Iavanet has a group exhibition on display at the Calandra Institute Galleria that runs through June 10th. Now, let's go to the Calandra Institute and find out what's so important about food, fashion, and film in the Italian cultures.
Italian fashion and style and food and film all came together to really make the big boost towards the conquering of the world. Italy started out, before there was an Italy, as a plate of soup surrounded by too many spoons, which is a colloquial expression they use in Italy, which is to say that marvelously irregular coastline and those wonderful valleys and fertile plains was a reason for just about everybody, from the Phoenicians to the French to the Australians, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, every kind of Goth, the Spanish, the Arabs, everybody invaded Italy. And they were not looking for conquest, they were looking for food. There was no Italian food before there was an Italy, and that happened in 1861 with the unification. What happened then was 20 completely disparate regions which had their own food, so that the food of Sicily bore very little resemblance to even the food of Campania, and the food of Campania bore no resemblance to what they were eating in Liguria, and the Ligurians didn't eat food in Tuscany. So you had 20 different regions and no agreement on what Italian food would be. But he wrote this book and he submitted it to a publisher, and they said, who's supposed to buy this? And he says, well, the emerging middle-class housewives in Italy could use a book like this, because every cookbook prior to this was written, for the most part, for the cooking staffs of the nobility, who were cooking in a very continental European style. Artusi published it himself. He printed about 1,200 copies and eventually sold 223,000 copies. It was the first cookbook that really kind of brought together regional dishes, especially Northern Italian dishes. This is an iconic photo of the way most of our grandparents and great-grandparents and parents came over through Ellis Island. 85% of the 5 million Italian immigrants, 85% of them were from the south. So Sicily, Campania, Calabria, Abruzzo. This is Raffaele Esposito, the inventor of the pizza alla Margherita, which was specifically and only a Neapolitan item. It was not invented in New Haven, Connecticut. It was, you know. There were things called pizzas, which the poor people ate, and the poor people were the only ones who would eat tomatoes. The rest of Italy did not eat tomatoes, and they were eating polenta up in the north, which for the very, very poor people up there. Raffaele was an enterprising fellow in Naples. The queen consort Margherita was coming to town, and they had a little contest to make the Neapolitan pizza, and he made it with tomato, mozzarella, and basil, which the 3 colors of the brand new Italian flag. And he called it after Margherita, and that's how it was born. And it proliferated very quickly in America. They got bigger because Americans and Italian Americans could afford to have as much food as they wanted. First Pizzeria in America, still here, 1905 on Spring Street, Lombardi's Pizza, wood-burning, coal-burning oven. 1906, very early on, a very elegant Italian restaurant, still as elegant as ever, Barbetta, opened by Piemontese, and it caught on with the music crowd, Caruso, Luisa Tetrazzini, Arturo Toscanini. It looks exactly like that. Palm Steakhouse. The importance of the Palm Steakhouse was it set the standard, the template for all, not only New York Italian steakhouses, but pretty much for steakhouses around the country. But most people think of Italian-American food more in line with Mama Leone's, which was, in its own way, a remarkable, effusive, celebratory, huge place where both Italian Americans and mostly tourists would go and find that the food was so abundant and so cheap. You had strolling musicians, you had pictures of Mount Vesuvius spouting magma, and you had nude statues, naked statues around, which is pretty racy, and you got a big block of provolone, and you got all this wonderful stuff. It was a remarkable and wonderful restaurant. I didn't say a very good one, but a remarkable one that most people's image of Italian-American food is based on. The marinara was a quick dish that was cooked. As my grandmother said, the reason it was called that was because the housewives would go down, the fishermen's wives would go down to the sea, and early in the morning their men would come back with their fishing boats, and they would have big cauldrons, and they just, oh, they're on the horizon. They put the garlic, the oil, tomatoes in, boom, and that was the mariner's sauce. So when they got there, they put the fish in, and everybody ate a big meal. With Mama Leone's, this is how we generally think of the mom-and-pop Italian-American restaurant or bar or tavern or cafe. The roly-poliness of Mom, the mustachioed guy who wasn't going to cost very much. You went in, you got a bottle of Chianti with the straw wrapped around it. You could take it home and put a candle in it. It was great. It was terrific. And the food was very, very cheap. This is the way people wanted Italian-American food to be. This is a very famous and wonderful commercial. It was a spoof on this very image, which was very lovable in its own way. What was not very lovable was the association of Italians with the mob and with the mafia. And I think anybody in this room has probably been asked by your non-Italian friends over the years, you're going to go to an Italian restaurant, is it connected? Huh? Is it connected? What about this place? Is it connected? They assume that every Italian restaurant is paying off the mob, or is owned by the mob and is going to be torched by the mob, or somebody is going to be shot at by the mob. This is where Michael Corleone shoots the police captain and the other mobster in Louis' restaurant, which was an actual restaurant in the Bronx, although this was actually filmed at Luna's restaurant in the Bronx, where I used to go as a kid. And again, the assumption was that the restaurateur would be complicit in this and allow him to hide the gun in the toilet. And people who saw the movie thought this was the way Italian food and restaurants, in fact, were. The interesting thing is before they sit down to eat and they're just making negotiations as to where they eat, it was important that the food be good before they went to the place. Goodfellas, another example, The Sopranos. There was one episode in which there's 15 of them dining at an Italian restaurant. They pay the bill but don't leave the waiter any tip. And the waiter comes out, just a little guy, and he says, you know, I got to feed my family. You don't leave me a tip. And they take out a gun and they just shoot him in the parking lot, which people seem to find amusing. A different image from the roly-poly Italian-American image that we spoke of, and from the mafia and the mob image, was in the 1950s movies made by Hollywood, which showed a new Italy, post-war Italy, with Vespas and wonderful little restaurants, and she's eating gelato on the Spanish Steps, 3 Coins in the Fountain. This is Rossano Brazzi, Katharine Hepburn here. This is from Summertime. There they are on the Piazza San Marco with the music and the cafe. This is what Americans were now seeing. We're lighting the Piazza with Olivia de Havilland, and bingo, Rossano Brazzi. He made about 6 of these movies in 1 year. There's Jimmy Stewart. The Hollywood crowd made Alfredos in Rome very famous by eating fettuccine Alfredo, which was invented by Alfredo to cure his wife's appetite after she had a baby. So he took the richest Parmigiano, the very best butter, and put like 42 eggs into the fettuccine. No cream, that's an American creation. And he made this wonderful dish, which in the 1920s, during the honeymoon of Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, they ate at his restaurant in Rome on the Via della Scrofa, and they loved this dish, ate there every night, brought back the fame of it to America, where within 1 year, fettuccine Alfredo, unknown in the rest of Italy, was appearing in American recipe books. Harry's Bar, which we have a Harry Cipriani here and several around. Harry's Bar was made famous by Hemingway. It started out as a bar in the 1930s, named after a guy who gave the money to the bartender to open Arrigo Cipriani. It became famous as an international watering hole, a very sophisticated place. And one day they said there were 6 heads of state, and meaning kings and queens, in Harry's Bar in one day, and none of them knew each other was coming. Harry's Bar was the only Cipriani, rather, was the only real-life person that Hemingway ever wrote about in his novels, which Across the River and Through the Trees. He went shooting with him on Torcello, and to this day it is one of the best and most expensive restaurants in Italy, known for creating the Bellini, known for creating Carpaccio, and known for cannily staying open during the worst floods in Venice. Chef Boyardee is really awful stuff, but it's very important because what happened was that Chef Boyardee was a real guy named Chef, I think it was Arturo Boyardee, and he was in the Midwest, and he became quite rich putting spaghetti in a can for the GIs in World War II. Everybody finally remembers when Lucy stomped the grapes in Italy and got into a fight with this woman, and it's a very lovable episode, which again cast a jolly folkloric cast on the way Italians make wine. The most important picture in terms of what it really was like back in the 1950s was the big night in which the chef, these are brothers, and the chef says, I want to make real Italian food. And he says, if you make real Italian food for our customers, we are out of business in a week. There's much more to the film than that, but that was the crisis point when you had Italian chefs from Italy come over and could not find anything but Parmesan flavored stuff. When Giorgio Armani, Ferragamo, Dolce Gabbana, Missoni, all of the great Italian designers completely shifted the world of fashion on its axis from Paris, and this is in the mid-'80s. All of the buyers from Bloomingdale's, the editors, fashion editors of Vogue magazine, Marie Claire, everyone else, converge in Milan to see this casual new Italian style. The American Gigolo, he dressed in all Armani fashions in this famous movie. This is the original Bice. This is Da Silvano, which is still difficult to get into any night of the week, and it's jammed with, as you can see, people dressed casually. Again, Silvano is from Tuscany, and he was at the right place at the right time. He's in the corner of 6th Avenue, and I think it's Spring Street, or Houston Street. And right at that moment when he opened, this trattoria serving sort of Tuscan food, right at that moment, you also had opening around the corner all of the Soho art galleries, the Tribeca boutiques. All of that would happen at the same exact time. Carrie at Il Cantinori, another Tuscan restaurant owned by Pino Luongo, this was the place where one of the Rolling Stones drove in on his motorcycle through the front door. This was the place where all of the artists of the period down there in Greenwich Village and Soho would hang out. And so Carrie was going to have her 35th birthday there, and nobody showed up in the episode of Sex and the City. The curious thing is that when this show came on the air, the phone rang off the hook with mothers wanting to book a reservation for their daughter's 35th birthday at Il Cantinori. Palio, not far from here, was that's a Sandro Chia mural. There's now another restaurant, but this was owned by Tony May. He went on to do with San Domenico. Say, I'm buying the Frette linens, I'm buying the best silverware, I'm buying the finest glassware, I'm bringing in the super Tuscans, the most marvelous wines that Italy produces, and serving you this kind of food with this kind of elegance. And of course, most of the New York food critics didn't get it and said, well, this doesn't look like an Italian restaurant. Is this really Italian food? Because he started serving regional Italian food. San Domenico's, which is also Tony May's, moved down to 26th Street, SD 26. The Maccionis, Tuscans, who opened a French restaurant called Le Cirque, or at least Sirio Maccioni did. And when Craig Claiborne once asked him, he says, well, you're Tuscan, how about making a plate of pasta? And they were not in the restaurant, and Sirio threw together, and his wife Edgy threw together just whatever they had. They had some broccoli, they had some peas, they had some carrots. They threw it together, put a little cream in it, and he said, this is delicious. What do you call it? And he says, I don't know, it's springtime, pasta primavera. Well, Craig Claiborne wrote about it in the New York Times. It became such an enormous success that everybody went to Le Cirque, wanted to order it. Trouble was, they had a French chef who categorically refused to make any pasta dish whatsoever. Says, this is a French restaurant, you will never see a pasta dish in a French restaurant. So the Mexican cook had to make it out back in a little chafing dish, and they finish it. But it's still to this day, it's never been on the menu at Le Cirque. and it's still one of their best-selling dishes. In the 1990s, so you have this fashion, you have the great ingredients coming in, you have virgin olive oil, balsamic vinegar, real Parmigiano, true prosciutto di Parma. All this stuff is coming in so that there's no excuse now for not making food taste just the way it does in Italy. And then along comes the Mediterranean diet, which flipped the old USDA food pyramid, which used to say, eat lots of meat, eat lots of red meat. What they did, and the International Olive Oil Commission was a big contributor to this. So you see olive oil, whole whoever cooked with olive oil except Italians. We didn't have very good olive oil in this country, but nobody cooked with olive oil. Now, there it is right in the middle, and red meat is the tiniest thing. That's what you should eat the least of up there. And you should eat bread, rice, couscous, polenta. Polenta! Poor people's food. I mean, this is ridiculous. Potatoes, beans, legumes, nuts and stuff. And how did they sell this Mediterranean diet? On the basis that Italians were not fat, on the basis that Italians lived longer, and that they had much, much lower rates of cardiovascular disease than Americans.
Next, we'll take you to the panel discussion of the Artists of Iavanet, who have a group exhibition on display at the Kalender Institute that runs through June 10th.
We feel that the great tradition of Italian excellence in the visual arts is alive in America, and by making our work visible, we're honoring and celebrating that continuum. And that's, you've seen that when it's the one I had in the studio.
And with all this intricate area, it can take quite a long time to shape something else. So like right now I have about 20 pieces at different stages of completion.
The idea comes from all of the Stone Age fertility figures that were found in Eastern Europe. My career was a professional engineer. I had a consulting firm. We did a lot of work overseas. Sometimes I was able to take time off and go to sites like Ephesus, Borobudur.
Then how did you make that shift from engineer to visual artist?
You retire from engineering and you become a visual artist. But it's something when I was 16 and 17 years old, I was doing sculpture. Actually, coming out of an Italian family, I had to work for a corporation and buy my mother a refrigerator. That was my mission in life. Unfortunately, I never worked for a corporation. I worked for myself, and I never bought my mother that refrigerator.
Over the course of the years, I've learned how to simulate different things that look heavy or are supposed to be real and are really not. So, for instance, in this piece that I have in the show, it was carved in foam, and I patinated it to look like metal. And this is something that I do as part of my day job and whatever,
That piece represents, it's pretty indicative of my work for the last 10 years. That piece was actually used by Fred Gardefee in his book, From Wise Guys to Wise Men. You have the unity of the Italian-American flag and the Italian flag. You have certain things that are very Italian and you might have on a table, like fruit and wine and stuff, but you also have a glass that's kicked over and there's wine pouring out. There's a knife that's stuck into the table. It's almost like there was a big fight and everybody left. There's a gun on one end. It's all this stereotype. There's also my head in it, which I'm made myself into a Roman. Not really. It's supposed to be an old Roman bust, That's what we Italian Americans maybe forgot about our culture. I think about how great our culture is and how far it goes back, and so I have the opposites of things. And because it's Frank Sinatra's shadow, all that. That was a symbol that there's always people that they can't get away from a certain vision of who they might have been. Like everybody thinks that he was connected to the mob in some sort.
I'm going to ask each one of you to give us a portrait of yourself as an artist and a young person in the context of your family situation. Did you discover your passion for the visual arts from someone in the family, or was it something you found on your own? Nancy, I'm going to start with you. How did you come to it?
I came to it on my own. It was okay to be artistic. To become an artist, you had to really be like Michelangelo. You had to be born with the skill. That was the way they thought it. My father at one point said to me, many years after I was showing, I'd make him come to my shows. They didn't really want to, but they would come. And he said to me one day, why don't you make something that looks like something? My mother was not so expansive in her thinking, but she would say on occasions, you know, it feels like a dream or something. You know, maybe she's thinking about her dreams. And so that was the kind of dynamic. My sister was always supportive, even though she didn't understand my art. My brother used to kind of laugh at it. He used to laugh at me, he used to laugh at my art. However, then I got a review in the New York Times. And he became more interested. And he's bought a home on the Upper East Side, and he's bought some sculpture of mine to be in it.
Karen, how about you?
In some ways, it's similar to what Nancy's saying. I always tell my students, you know, give your family like 20 years and they'll probably get it. You know, because they all tell me these stories, and then I meet their parents and I can't believe that they have artist children. But I'd say in my case, since I said there was this freedom in my family, I think that they, kind of like anything I did, they eventually came to understand it. And my mother actually became kind of a critic. And she really got a good eye, I have to say. And the feeling that I had that did get it from her and my grandmother
that's wonderful.
was confirmed, you know.
My father was instrumental in introducing me to science, to art, and just to have an innate curiosity. When I was a child, he was a barber by profession. He got a job when his barber shop wasn't doing well, a second job for New York State making photostats. That's copies that he licenses with a giant camera with a bellows and photostatic paper. He got involved in photography from that. When he photographed us, he never posed us. He would just photograph us in a very spontaneous manner. Whatever was going on in the room while he was taking pictures would be the photographs. I never felt self-conscious taking pictures. I never felt forced. It just came to me quite naturally. My mother, on the other hand, gave me the gift of going after education. She was always saying to me, become educated, become educated, become educated. It was like the message I always got from her. So between both of them, I received a lot. Sundays was always family day, and the Italian family I came from. Sunday, you did whatever you wanted. On Saturday, your day off, but on Sunday, you were always with the family. It was visiting other family members. It was going out to the movies. It was different trips we would take. And my dad, whenever we were out on these trips, would photograph us. So he was the one who got me started in this. He was the one who introduced me to photographing the family. So I picked up the gauntlet later on, and it was just a natural progression that I just took pictures of my family, and it came out Sundays.
Some people might question what is the purpose or the need to have a group of visual artists who identify by ethnicity.
Something genetic that we want to gather around and make vibrate. When we go to Italy, both as tourists and working artists, we get gene rushes. And it's a wonderful thing. And so this is a way of sharing that.
Well, you know, to be an artist is a very isolating experience. And it has to be in many ways. So it's a place for an artist like myself to feel a community.
Actually, when I first hear dividing artists into ethnic groups, I always bristle at the thought. But what I've learned with our group is there's really a lovely sense of community. We like each other. You know, gives us some encouragement.
Tied me back, not only to my father, but especially to my grandparents who came from Sicily, and made me think about my grandfather, who I'm named after, a lot. He worked in the sulfur mines and had very little to eat. It was a really harsh life. When he came to Christie Street, he lived in an apartment that had 2 rooms, and there was 2 beds in it where he slept with his wife in one bed and the 5 children slept in the other bed.
I came from a community that artists, if they were going to get anything done, whether they were Italian American or any other kind of artist, had to sort of take the reins into their own hands and create some venue for themselves. Artists, like you say, are very solitary. When they work, they usually work alone, and then after the work's done, then they have a party, an opening if they're lucky. And then you get postpartum depression. You're depressed for 6 months before you get a chance to work again. And I do think Italian American artists in New York have been shortchanged for a long time. I think you just look at the number of them that are famous this is one of the biggest ethnic groups in New York City. You can count. To me, so advocacy is very important, and I think that's in everything, especially, I can't understand why in New York City, with all the famous Italian Americans, they can't, and whether they're scientists, artists, politicians, they can't get together and create something important that goes beyond themselves, like a museum. Every other ethnic culture has it. So for me, it's my way of saying, just be more active, do something. Maybe it'll lead to something.
Next, on Italics News Briefs, we'll bring you stories on some of the events making news in our Italian-American community.
On Monday, June 6th, the New York Conference of Italian-American State Legislators holds its annual conference at the state capitol in Albany, New York. Please note the new schedule. Part 1 of the conference proceeds after registration at 10 a.m. in the well of the Legislative Office Building, or LOB. Part 2 of the conference takes place later that evening at the Festa Italiana, held at the Troy Italian-American Community Center in Troy, New York. To register for the conference, which is mandatory, or for more information, please call 518-455-3334.
On June 10th, Friday evening, we will be having a benefit here at the Calandra Institute. We're very excited to have poet John Giordano and a musician Vic Ruggiero who will be performing that night, and it's a fundraiser to help support the relaunching of the Italian American Review, and so we hope that all of you can make it at that time on June 10th.
Well, that's it for this edition of Italics. Thanks for watching. I'm Anthony Tamburri. See you next time. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.